Hello, everybody. This is Breaking Ish, and we are back to reviewing the January 6th committee report. I'm in Appendix 2, which discusses the lapses in National Guard failures. Lapses in National Guard judgments. If you're new to my channel, please like and subscribe. I rely on your support, and I really appreciate it. A couple of housekeeping matters. I don't go over the transcripts or the ancillary materials that came out after the report was published. I go over only the report. And secondly, and more importantly, I have a co host who you might see behind me every now and then. You might even hear him making licking sounds. It's a very big dog. There's nothing I can do about it. And there's some unionized terms of him licking whenever he wants. Anyway, so now let's get to the meat of it. I didn't go over it yesterday and the day before, I believe. Has it been 2 days? Because obvious social reasons, because of Tyree Nichols' video, because of Mr. Paul Pelosi's video, because of sentencing of the guy who pepper sprayed Brian Sicknick. It was a big day. It was a big weekend, and people are still talking about that in the media. But I believe that it's time for us to again get back to going over the report. I want to finish this assignment that I've given myself to go over this report with you, with all of you. So today will be the last section of me going over the second appendix, which is security lapses of the DC National Guard. And, these last some excerpts, they paint a pretty damning picture of Secretary of War McCarthy. And it he tries to blame shift onto many other people, but he is unsuccessful in doing that because the committee does a really good job of giving us a record of what McCarthy did and, more importantly, didn't do. So I'll go to the report now. At 3:04 p.m., Acting Secretary Miller said he approved deployment of DC Guard to assist law enforcement at the Capitol at that time. Acting Secretary Miller did not understand why Major General Walker, if he felt the exigency demanded it, did not deploy troops as soon as 3 p.m., as his 3 p.m. order allowed it. Why didn't he launch them? I'd love to know, he said. Secretary McCarthy agreed. That's where we may have talked past each other in his office, because Secretary McCarthy thought that he had told General Walker. However, Major General Walker himself understood he had to wait for approval from Secretary McCarthy to deploy his forces. But as he waited on that video call for hours, he did strongly consider sending them anyway. He turned to his lawyer and said, "Hey, you know what? What we're going to do, and I'm just going to shoulder the responsibility." According to Major General Walker, his lawyer responded, "What if you get sued?" Colonel Matthews, that lawyer, told him not to do that. Just hold on. The guard officials located with Major General Walker at the Armory all say he seriously contemplated aloud the possibility of breaking with the chain of command. Should we just deploy now and resign tomorrow? Was how Lieutenant Nick recalled Major General Walker bluntly putting it. I would have done just that, Major General Walker said, but not for those 2 letters from his superiors curtailing Guard redeployment. The man who signed one of the letters, however, himself a former member of the DC Guard, now says Major General Walker should have moved forward regardless of whether he had proper authorization. I've launched QRF without approval more than once, Acting Secretary Miller said. If you are the person on the ground in the Army and you realize that there's something that is unpredictable or unexpected and you have the ability to influence it, The culture, the training, the education, the expectation of you, the American people, is that you will execute and do what you can, even if it costs you your job. Yeah, Acting Secretary Miller has the audacity to say that of the on the ground troops of Major General Walker. But that same logic that applies to the generals who were in charge of DC Guard deployment, that doesn't apply to those generals. Does the mandate of the National Guard somehow change and become more lenient once it gets to general level? Is that what Acting Secretary Miller is trying to say here? Because anything else is hogwash. After authorization at 3:04, Secretary McCarthy said he gave Major General Walker a call. He told him to mobilize the entire Guard, bring everybody in. And I said, move the QRF to the armory and get as many people as you can to the armory and configure them in a minimum of ride gear and batons. This is on the day of the insurrection, by the way. This is as the insurrection is happening. Secretary McCarthy had weeks and months to prepare for this. He had hours before, when he saw the crowds mobilizing, to mobilize Major General Walker's troops, but he didn't do that. At 3:04 p.m., when people were inside the Capitol Rotunda, that's when he was giving orders to configure into a minimum ride gear and batons. And then we're going to do a mission analysis of what we need to do with the police. That's what Secretary McCarthy said at 3:04 p.m. of the day of the insurrection. Major General Walker categorically denies that any such call took place. In fact, Major General Walker said the two men did not talk at all until much later that night. Here's the bottom line. The secretary was unavailable to me, and he never called me, Major General Walker said. So Secretary of War McCarthy, needs to be subpoenaed by Jack Smith and asked the questions of these inconsistencies. And Secretary Miller needs to be subpoenaed to ask whether the procedures of the National Guard change and become more lenient as it goes up the chain of command. Because I would think that it would be the opposite of that. I would think that the generals would be on top of mobilizing the troops. They would be on top on the video surveillance, that they would be checking intelligence, that they would be coordinating with other departments for intelligence. That's what these leadership positions are meant to do. They aren't meant to sit there and make aloof conjectures and speculate on evidence, on information, on intelligence without ever having gone and looked at them. Because the report points out they never did. They didn't even organize an intelligence assessment group. They didn't do that. Secretary McCarthy was lying to members of Congress during the insurrection. While he assured them that he was mobilizing the Guard, he had given no such order to Major General Walker. So at 3 p.m., 25 minutes of Secretary McCarthy's time was spent reassuring members of Congress that Guard was indeed coming, although he had not conveyed the order. That was time unspent on facilitating their actual coming. So he didn't actually facilitate them to get to the Capitol. He lied to members of Congress. Secretary McCarthy was drafting an operations plan without the ground commander of the National Guard. He was doing it nearly 2 hours into the insurrection. So it gives you an idea of the level of dereliction of duty that I think would rise to the level of providing aid and comfort to enemies of the United States. And that is treason. At around 3:49, Speaker Pelosi is heard in video footage from that day urging Acting Secretary Miller to hurry. Just pretend for a moment this was the Pentagon or the White House or some other entity that was under siege, she told him. over the phone while she and the rest of the congressional leadership were huddled in a secure location. Just get them there. That's what then Speaker Pelosi told Acting Secretary Miller. But was Miller and McCarthy doing their jobs? No, they weren't. They were lying. When Secretary McCarthy arrived at MPD headquarters, he joined Secretary Conti, his Army Operations Director, Brigadier General Chris LeNave, and Assistant Chief Carroll by phone. In the next 20 minutes, Secretary McCarthy developed a con op. So this was in the thick of the insurrection. He was developing the plans. But Major General Walker said, if I need you to tell me how to execute a civil disturbance mission, he should relieve me, he should fire me. It wasn't until later, post January 6th, that Major General Walker said he found out that Secretary McCarthy, his boss, had been putting together a con-op plan without him. So the chain of command was corrupted. The chain of command got in the way of on-the-ground troops deploying. It got in the way of on-the-ground troops coordinating. It got in the way of on-the-ground troops getting their civil disturbance gear. Secretary McCarthy's poor leadership delayed the National Guard's response time. It created confusion and misunderstanding among military commanders on the ground. Also, despite his explicit claims, McCarthy did not employ any top-down structure to oversee the Guard. In fact, he employed a top-down obstruction, a top-down muddling of the chain of command, and did everything he could to get in the way of on-the-ground troops from mobilizing and having civil disturbance gear. Ultimately, no plan from Army leaders, strategic or tactical, made it to the troops. If they came up with a plan, they never shared it with us, Major General Walker said. They claimed they were putting a plan together. That's what took so long. I never saw a plan from the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army. Colonel Hunter agreed that no one ever told me because I already had the plan there, and no one ever informed me that there was a different plan or a different con-op. He said to the extent a hasty plan was put into action on January 6th, and it was this. I created the concept of operation, he added. The plan that was actually used as far as which lot they would come into, who would meet them at the lot, and then who would lead them over to the Capitol. That was between myself and the MPD and Capitol Police. So the concept of operation plan was already drafted by on-the-ground troops and their commanders, Major General Walker and Colonel Hunter. But they received no deployment orders from Secretary of War McCarthy or Secretary Miller. After hours of wait, Major General Walker said the plan was executed just like we said it would be from the start. Get to the Capitol, take direction from the ranking police officers there to help restore order. Colonel Hunter passed the details of his hasty plan onto Lieutenant Colonel Renke, the highest ranking officer at the rally point, letting him know, hey, when you pull into this lot, they will meet you there. This is who is, you're going with these personnel. Exactly as Secretary McCarthy had just spent 20 minutes putting together. So Secretary McCarthy worked to disorient and disorganize his on-the-ground troops in violation of his oath. His dereliction of duty, his gross negligence rises to the level of, I would say, providing aid and comfort to his enemies, to the enemies of the country, the people who were attacking the Capitol on January 6th. and the people who had planned the attack. He facilitated and provided aid and comfort and gave them time, bought them time, hours of time. Until the very end, operational command dysfunction hamstrung DC National Guard from supporting law enforcement at the Capitol. After an hour and a half spent in calls, travel, and making plans, Secretary McCarthy was prepared to greenlight the deployment of the Guard at 4:35 p.m. But miscommunication led to another half-hour delay. Secretary McCarthy relayed the go order to Major General Walker with his subordinate Brigadier General Leneve serving as the intermediary. In a conversation, Major General Walker said never happened. According to Secretary McCarthy, Brigadier General Leneve wasn't a junior aide in his role. In his role, he can speak once given the authority, delegated authority to speak as Secretary of the Army. He said that the first star officer was standing next to me. He said that the first star officer was standing next to me, and General Piat said that it was generally uncommon for him to ask his staff to transmit the communication from the Secretary to General Walker. For his part, Brigadier General Leneve denies that he himself conveyed the go order. He said he spoke with Major General Walker first at 4:25 p.m. to tell him that his forces should get on the bus, do not leave. Micromanaging. This is micromanaging. On the second call at 4:35, Brigadier General Leneve said he overheard Secretary McCarthy himself convey the go order to Major General Walker. He said something to the effect of, "You're approved to provide support." Secretary McCarthy, on his part, said he never spoke a word. You notice how this confusion is caused by Secretary McCarthy. It's not caused by Major General Walker. It's not caused by Brigadier General Leneve. It's caused by Secretary of War McCarthy. He has hamstrung, he lied, he distracted, he blocked, and did everything he could to get in the way of National Guard helping the police departments on the ground on January 6th. That's what Secretary McCarthy did. Brigadier General Leneve said the secretary then again handed him the phone to convey the details of where to go and what officer to meet up with. Those details would be the full extent of the CONOP allegedly communicated to Major General Walker. He even recalled Major General Walker saying Roger to acknowledge the plan. But Brigadier General Leneve said there was mass confusion in that room, and he agreed that there were huge communication problems. Mind you, this is the operations room of the National Guard coordinating an operation of guarding the capital of the United States against an armed insurrection. And they were doing this type of bureaucratic nonsense till the very end of the violent insurrection. Major General Walker said there was no such call nor anything like it. He said he remained on the video conference line the whole time with everybody else. He said he would not have taken an order from Brigadier General Leneve anyhow. Why would I ever take directions from General Leneve? Anybody? Brigadier General Leneve, 1 star, Major General Walker said. I mean, he's not a peer. It wouldn't be somebody that would convey that type of message to me. So my thinking wouldn't have been that he would have been speaking on behalf of the secretary. Although his staff confirms that they didn't see him field a call from Secretary McCarthy or Brigadier General Leneve, including never seeing him leave their conference room, Major General Walker's own note taker appears to have jotted down at 4:37 the following: advised to send 150 to establish D Street at first outer perimeter, General Leneve, beside what appears to be his phone number. So this is the confusion that happened when National Guard was supposed to deploy troops on behalf of the Congress of the United States. National Guard Ground Commander Captain Tarp said, by the time we got there, we were just holding back the people who remained past the curfew. The height of the riot had passed. There may have there may not have been any intentional delays on January 6th, but there was definitely willful negligence, gross negligence, and abject failure of relations of leadership. Ground Commander Walker testified, it was clearly there the decision paralysis, decision avoidance. Secretary McCarthy said that it was possible that defense and DC Guard leaders had simply not been coordinating their planning. You think? He acknowledged that a lot of things were probably missed. It was tremendously confusing. Why, Secretary McCarthy? You had 7 months to organize and do the game planning that you said you were going to do after the summer disaster with the National Guard. A lot of things were probably missed. It was tremendously confusing and makes for a messy response, you think? No one within defense, army, or guard leveled accusations of an intentional delay. Why? Why would they? Why would they want to take responsibility for their actions? That's not what leaders like McCarthy would do. The ones who willingly dodge their responsibilities, why would they own up to responsibility? I didn't see anybody trying to throw sand in the gearbox and slow things down, General Milley said. Well, no, General Milley, you did that by not coordinating and not getting the intelligence assessment teams ready. Your leadership, General Milley, is what caused this. Talk about top-down structure. We should go all the way to the top and point our fingers at these people. I don't have any fear in doing that because they were in the wrong. Major General Walker said the Army's reluctance to approve National Guard assistance to the mayor during the planning for the anticipated January 6th events continued through January 6th itself. I don't know where the decision paralysis came from, but it was clearly there. The decision paralysis, decision avoidance. The January 6th report, in so many words and very politely, pins National Guard failures on institutional ruts that compromise the National Guard's operations and effectiveness. This calls for the Defense Department to investigate its intelligence and operational processes. Where the Guard's deployment on January 6th is concerned, the lessons learned at this juncture include careful evaluations on the basis of limited information may take time. Careful evaluation on the basis of limited information may take time. Statutorily constrained intergovernmental requests for assistance and multi-level approval processes are complex and may be time-consuming. Any visible military presence in the domestic setting is circumscribed by law and triggers considerable constitutionally driven sensitivities, and crisis communications are often imperfect, especially in unforeseen and rapidly evolving situations. These are the takeaways that the committee gives us from their investigation. And I want to break these down a little bit. Careful evaluation on the basis of limited information may take time. DC Guard, FBI did not carefully evaluate, and they did not have limited information. They had an avalanche of information coming from several different sources. They just didn't have the operational readiness to look at it. So shift the blame where it belongs. It's not that they had limited information. They had overwhelming information. Everybody who had 2 eyes that could see and 2 ears that could hear could see and hear what was happening all around the country, from social media to rallies to conversations on media mass media. You couldn't avoid it unless you had your head in the sand. Okay? Statutorily constrained intergovernmental requests for assistance and multi-level approval processes are complex and may be time consuming. You don't think that that assessment is an assessment that governmental entities need to do on a regular basis? It had to take an insurrection for them to come to this realization. And this assessment falls in line with the assessment by Secretary McCarthy that they needed a procedure put in place after their big gaffes of the George Floyd riots responses. But there were 7 months between the George Floyd riots and Donald's insurrection. What were they doing there? Sucking their thumbs? Any visible military presence in the domestic setting is circumscribed by law and triggers considerable constitutionally driven sensitivities. Well, military presence has to be categorically separated from National Guard presence. Major General Walker pointed out in this report that it is the National Guard citizen soldier mission to defend Congress. It is part of the mission that Thomas Jefferson had in mind when the National Guard was brought into existence. So, domestic setting, National Guard is supposed to be there. Hell, when I went to volunteer for after disasters, after Hurricane Sandy and after Hurricane Katrina, National Guard was stationed there. They were helping us help the people and provide them with aid. That's what the National Guard does, provides support for communities. We are used to seeing National Guard in amongst us. I'm used to seeing National Guard around me. I went to college to a land-grant university in the middle of Illinois. There was an armory next to my dorm. I saw National Guard troops there all the time. Their National Guard troops are not just purely military troops. They are citizen soldiers. The mission of the National Guard is to safeguard the country. They are the well-regulated militia that we talk about. In a country that is all up in arms about gun regulation and gun rights, we need to take heed about what the National Guard's duties were and are, and how National Guard leadership themselves had no idea that this was their core mission. So, of course, military presence in domestic settings should be circumscribed. There should be no military on the ground in the United States. That is American military. But National Guard is an exception to that. National Guard carries out civilian missions within the country all the time when there are emergencies. That's when National Guard is deployed. That is their mission. And Secretary of War McCarthy failed to appreciate that mission. General Milley failed to appreciate that mission. Now, what's the other one? Okay. And crisis communications are often imperfect, especially in unforeseen and rapidly evolving situations. My response to that is, so you're telling me that the United States military is not trained to communicate during crises and work with rapidly evolving situations that are unforeseen? You're telling me that the military is not equipped to do that? Then what the hell is the military equipped to do? Like, is somebody going to chalk out the battle lines for you when you go to battle? There are no rapidly evolving, unforeseen situations happening on the battleground? Like, what kind of an aloof, what kind of a disorganized military do we actually have then? Why are we spending, I don't know, the biggest chunk of taxpayer dollars on the military then? We should be spending it on oversight of the military than the military. Like, these failures of the National Guard, these excuses are simply not sufficient. They don't cut it. They rise to the level of gross negligence on the parts of the leaders. These leaders need to be subpoenaed by Jack Smith and asked these questions. They need to be reviewed by inspectors generals of the different branches and different departments of the military. What were the procedures? What were the lapses in procedures? Fix those lapses, fill in those blanks. Have we seen any of that happen? Have we seen any of that being informed? Have we been informed of those updates? Do we not deserve to know those updates? It's our tax dollars going to them. It's our country they're safeguarding. It's those stars and those banners that they are wearing, the pensions they're getting, the benefits they're getting. This is what they do with the time? Don't you deserve answers as American citizens? Shouldn't you be demanding answers for these lags, these lapses from your representatives? Shouldn't you be demanding your congresspeople to hold investigations and hearings as to how National Guard leadership failed categorically? I believe you need to. So, with that, I'd like to say thank you. I don't know if I have any questions. This is the end of the review of the National Guard failures. The next appendix is the big ripoff. Okay, so this is the last segment for the National Guard failures. And I believe that the January 6th committee does an excellent job telling us what happened. It shows us the people who did not do their jobs. I believe that we should uh, press our members of Congress to investigate. Obviously, House leadership now, the House committees are compromised. I cannot stress this enough. Know this: House congressional committees are currently compromised. We cannot expect any real business of national security to happen in House congressional committees for the next 2 years. What we can see happen are distractions, delays, and congressional overreach. We can hope that Senate takes up some of these investigations. I would hope that some of National Guard leadership, some of military leadership under the direction of President Joe Biden and Secretary of Defense Austin would take up these investigations and reviews and would inform the American people about how the procedures have changed so that we may again have faith in the operational capacity of our military and our National Guard in situations of domestic disturbance, because the time of that disturbance has not passed. The danger remains. Donald Trump remains a clear and present danger to our democracy, and he continues to operate in open and plain view. So, with that, I'd like to say goodbye and thank you for listening.